Aloha and welcome to Island Connections. I'm Ibrahim Aoude. Egypt, the revolution continues. With us we have Dr. Fikry Andrawes, who's originally from Egypt, and he has visited Egypt last year, and he'll be going there in a few weeks from now to check it out, so to speak. And so we are very happy that you could join us.
Thank you.
So we can discuss what is really going on in Egypt in the context of the larger region. We're talking about change occurring in many places, and certain uprisings are still continuing, like in Yemen and Bahrain, yeah? So Syria and all
Libya.
this. Libya is a big mess after the victory of the opposition on al-Qaddafi, thanks to NATO and the United States. For that, we have now a big mess in Libya, much more so than there was under Gaddafi. Not that Gaddafi was a great guy, but anyway. So here we have Egypt and the region, and it is a boiling situation. So could you tell us what you think about what's going on at this moment? Then we can go back in history, meaning like last year, and then forward as well.
What's happening really, if you want to look at what happened in the last year, you found there are lots of positive things. Some people were unrealistically optimistic. There are things that didn't go the way most people wanted to go, but generally there is progress. If you look at it, for instance, what's the most important thing is that the symbol of the regime that stayed in power for 30-some years had to leave power. The head of the system has to leave. But there's still many people attached to this system, either emotionally or mostly financially. They're still fighting, and they have to fight. This should be really expected because it is their interest. For so many years, these guys were making lots of money, and they thought that the country is really theirs. And suddenly, in 18 days, the head of the system collapsed while they thought that they're going to have Mubarak's son be the next president. So this is certainly one of the positive things. And like most revolutions, there is initial success, and then there's some setbacks. But as you very correctly selected the title of your talk, this revolution is a continuous process, and I think it's going to be like that for a number of years to come. Yeah.
Yeah, let's try and have the discussion broaden it to talk about other states in the area, and then we can go forward from this and see in what context Egypt is located, and then we take it from there. For that, I would like to go to a segment of an interview I did with Professor Faride Farhi, and we were talking about the Turks and the role the Turks playing in vis-a-vis like a lot of other states in the region. So we'll go to that one, and then we can discuss.
Good.
Now, Turkey is placed in a very interesting situation because, as the Turkish government said the other day, a couple of days ago, they honestly believe that an attack on Iran will be disastrous. It will certainly be disastrous for Turkey because Turkey is very much dependent on Iran for its energy. And it has already said repeatedly that it will not abide by the sanctions that have been imposed by Europe and United States. It will only abide by the United Nations sanctions. So it finds the potential for a strike on Iran very, very problematic. And in the past, Turkey has tried to be a mediator in this process, and it will try to do so, no doubt. However, in order to do that, there has to be more clarity in American foreign policy in terms of what the objectives of the negotiation are. If the objective is to create some sort of limitation on Iranian nuclear program, as well as impose a more robust inspection regime, that objective is something that can be negotiated. But if the objective of the United States is regime change, clearly that takes away the incentive. There is an added element involved here that makes it very difficult to bring the Iranians to the negotiation table. Because of the Israeli influence on American politics, now most of the sanctions that are imposed on Iran, including the most draconian sanction on Iran's central bank, are not generated from the executive branch in the United States. They are generated in Congress. So they cannot be negotiated away on when American diplomats go and negotiate. They cannot promise that if the Iranians put limit on their programs, they can come back and convince American Congress to change its position and take those sanctions away. You know better than anybody else that the sanctions that were imposed on Iraq during Saddam's time, it took years, to lift them. Even years after Saddam was gone. So there is a real structural problem in resolving this issue that has to do with Israeli influence, Israeli politics, and the influence of Israeli politics on American politics, especially during an election year in the United States.
Yeah, so here we have this particular context. The U.S. and Israel are players in this.
Yes.
And the important thing for us in terms of Egypt is part of the region, and then here you have like a lot of competitors for Egypt. You have, of course, Israel, you have Turkey, you have Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the U.S. is playing among, with all these guys, all against the middle, so to speak. And so that is then a relationship between the regional politics, international politics, of course, since the U.S. is also an international player, and then domestic politics in terms of Turkey, Iran, and in this case, Egypt. So how do you see that factoring into what's going on inside of Egypt?
I think that what happened in Iran is very interesting, because one would ask why Iran wants to build nuclear weapon if they do. I personally think that no country on the face of the earth should really use or even build any nuclear weapon, any country in the world. But you have the Israeli example, which the media here doesn't talk about. They have more than 200 nuclear heads. But an Israeli thinker by the name of Aoude said that Israel can't really use this nuclear weapon for the obvious reason. Most important is that for Israel is to divide the area into smaller community based on religion or ethnic community. So Israel would live as a small minority among other minorities. But Israel to live as a minority in a sea of Muslim world, this is the major threat to Israel. And this guy said, Aoude said that Israel's success depends on how to divide three countries, namely Iraq, Iran, and Egypt. They successfully did that in the case of Iraq. Iraq now, for all practical reasons, they have the Kurds, they have the Sunni, they have the Shia. So it's already divided, and some people said that it will end up being 3 countries somehow. They are playing the game with Iran. I don't think Iran, if they make nuclear weapons, they will dare to use it, because they have seen the destruction of Iraq. Iraq was totally destroyed. If Iran tried to use nuclear weapons against the American or against the Israelis, they will be demolished on the face of the earth. There's no question about that, and the Iranians know that. So the question is why they want to have nuclear weapons. They want to have nuclear weapons as a deterrent. So that leaves the 3rd country that they want to divide, which is Egypt. They are trying to divide Egypt, but they are not going to succeed, because the Egyptians are quite a uniform group of people. Historically, they are the same very much, some Christian, some Muslim. You cannot divide them based on religion, because Copts and Muslims are in every town, in every building, in every lane in Egypt. So you can't really do that. They're still playing the game in Iran, and I don't think they will succeed in Iran. So this is basically the strategy of Israel, which is, we all know that the Israelis really are having control of the United States policy in the Middle East. The United States policy is not based on really on principle. It's based on interest and the interest groups that really manipulate and control our Congress.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is go to another segment from the interview with Faridi, and she's talking about Israel and Iran as well, so we can expand that discussion.
You have Israel on a daily basis threatening and talking about the possibility of striking Iran. I don't think that that's what they will do, essentially because they don't have the capability to destroy Iran's nuclear program without American help, but they are doing it. So they are engaged in an escalating game. You have, on the other hand, the Iranians responding in a similar blustering way. United States in some ways caught in the middle, wanting on one hand to pressure Iran, to strangulate Iran, yet on the other hand not wanting to directly get involved. Yet at the same time, United States and Iran do not have any means of communication. So in this triangular game, the possibility of miscalculation, the possibility of miscommunication, and accidental war in an area that is highly militarized, the Persian Gulf, increases and has the potential of bringing everybody that has an interest in the region into this conflict. You also have other players whose intentions are not very clear in terms of how far they want to go. You have Saudi Arabia that is engaged in a strategic game with Iran. You have Qatar, which is a small country but with a lot of money. Therefore, it is funding all sorts of oppositional movements whose allegiances are not very clear. For example, in the case of Syria, we do not know what kind of ideology the fighters are bringing into the conflict with the Syrian government. There are reports that some of the Islamist fighters in Libya that were supported by Qatar have now gone to fight in Syria. So the players that are on the ground are not transparent. Their intentions are not transparent. Obviously, they have immediate intentions, but they may end up, catapulting the region into a much broader conflict that they did not intend to.
Yeah, so here you have Israel trying to call the shots or pressuring the U.S. to intervene in a way that might please Israel. But there's the other part to that, or another perspective, is that both Israel and the United States have roles, and they have agreed on those roles insofar as the Middle East is concerned, at least. So how do you see that, and how do you see, for instance, the machinations of Israel in Egypt, especially as regards the peace treaty of 1979? And what are they trying to do with this particular thing? On the one hand, the Israelis, on the other hand, like the military council and the people in Tahrir.
Before I address the treaty with Israel, I think Farida said the highly militarized area in the Middle East. There is something there that we should really consider. Number one is 25% of the weapons sold in the world is sold in the Middle East. And of course, great part of it is American weapons. So there is an American interest here, which is it's hard for some people to believe, but this is American interest. And I would like to remind you that Eisenhower, before he retires, his last address to the nation, he warned the American people from the congregational military complex. So this is, on one hand, is something that we should always keep in mind.
Yeah, the industrial military.
Right. Also, I think part of the United States policy, as well as Israel, to have a continuous state of tension. They don't want the area to really just get away from this conflict and pay attention to their internal problem, to their democratic process, to building their own country, because the tension is weakening these countries. As far as the treaty with Israel, I think every politician in Egypt said that we will honor it. But they could renegotiate it. There's no reason why, because we have a treaty, it wouldn't be renegotiated. And I think there are lots of things in this treaty that really it should be revisited. We're talking about almost 30-some years now. Any treaty in the world wouldn't continue forever, but I think for all good intention, and also for Egypt good intention, and best interest is to really respect this treaty, because Israel is a country in the area that's going to be with us for a while, or a long while. But the Israelis also have to look at them as part in the Middle East, not as a society that could impose their will by force. And I just want to remind you that when Obama addressed the Congress, he didn't say a single word on Palestinians. And of course, for the obvious reason that this is a year where there is a presidential election, and they worried about the friends of Israel and their influence on the Congress as well as in the general election.
Yeah, that should give any American pause about the influence of the Zionist lobby, the Israeli lobby, on American politics, and how they have control over most Congress members.
They do. In fact, they pay money, which is, it's really as a bribe to almost all our congressmen and senators. And, but they really, within the Jewish community, there is an opposition to what the Israelis are doing and wanted to do. Those who support Israel blindly, they are not more than 15–20%.
Yeah, but they seem to be like influencing
the media,
the narrative.
They influence the media.
Right. On that, because you mentioned something, how Israel would like to keep tension going, so,
and the United States.
Okay, and the United States. But Faridi has something similar to that, so which we will go to now, and then maybe we agree, disagree, etc. Okay, we'll go to Faridi on that.
Precisely because the Israelis are much more mortified of resolution of conflict between United States and Iran than Iran's nuclear program. Because if the Iran-US problem is resolved, what happens? Israel cannot externalize the problems that it has. The world will turn to Israel and essentially say, okay, what about the question of occupation? As you well know, the question of occupation has disappeared from the agenda, but if the Iranian problem is resolved, then Israel's issues will come to the core as a source of tension in the region. Also, if the Iranian manage to reach a compromise solution with the Americans, that will indeed improve Iran's standing in the region. It will indeed satisfy Iranian hegemonic aspirations in the region, because they have stood up to a superpower. They have managed to come up with a deal that the Israelis perceive will undermine their strategic superiority in the region. So their interest essentially lies in making sure that no negotiated settlement occurs between the United States, that this remains a festering problem. Now, the problem with that approach is that in order to do that, because you have begun a process of constant sanctioning, in order to maintain that energy, you have to keep pressuring Iran more and more. So there is an escalating logic in this approach that has now reached a dangerous boiling point. Up to now, it was working to not allow negotiations, but now it is reaching a point where we're talking about not only preventing negotiations, but causing war.
Causing war. I mean, and here Egypt is in turmoil and in chaos. And as someone said, there are three legitimacies in Egypt. The legitimacy, quote unquote, of the Supreme Military Council.
SCAF.
Yeah, SCAF, Supreme Council for the Armed Forces. And then there's the legitimacy of parliament, where you have the Islamists in control, both the Ikhwan and the Salafis. And then we can talk more about that later on. And then the legitimacy of Tahrir, Tahrir as, as a metaphor for, the uprising and the situation in terms of the revolutionary process. So what do you think of all that?
This is an open-end question. How much time you got?
Yeah. No, but in terms of, in fact, Israel wanting to meddle and doesn't want to have anything but tension.
Yeah, I think any educated person in the Middle East knows that. And knows that also there is a marriage between the United States policy and the Israelis policy. And it's not based on the good ethics of the United States policy, that the United States is trying to tell the world we really support freedom and democracy and all these things. The history of the United States is different than that entirely. I think the people in the Middle East are sympathetic with the Iranian, because Iranian so far was able to stand to the American policy and to the Israeli. Of course, it is hot air, because I don't think the Iranian could or think to do anything to Israel, because they know if this happened, Israel will destroy them and the United States will do that. So this is really out of the question. Once again, I just would like to repeat that Iran wants to have nuclear weapon, if they're going to have it, as a deterrent, not to be used. They're not going to use it. As far as the problems in Egypt, of course, they are trying to play on the danger of Islam and political Islam. Political Islam is really part of what's happening in Egypt now. The history of the Islamic movement started in Egypt in 1928, and it continued. And they were sentenced to jail, and many of them were really killed without good reason. So they didn't really, the system in Egypt didn't allow the political Islam movement in order to really evolve it to something that could meet the needs of the people or the time. So now they got about 50% of the vote. What they're going to do is remain to be seen. I personally against having an Islamic government, and the Muslim Brotherhood said they are not going to have an Islamic government. But the reality is that they are political Islam party. If they could really improve the situation in Egypt, that's fine. Who is going to object to that? Are they capable of doing that? This is another story which remains to be seen. I don't think they are. I hope they will be able to do well. The only way for them to do well is to become one force among other forces. And I don't think really they will be at the worst scenario. They will be worse than the Mubarak regime was with regard to their corruption. And we have a democratic process, and the Tahrir Square really is still quite legitimate. And since January 25th last year, almost every single week, there was always a demonstration in Tahrir Square, and it's going to continue. And it's not going to be only in Egypt, it's going to be in other places in the Middle East. And I think there is something that people of the world started to revolt. For instance, what happened in Wall Street. People are objecting to that, and it started to move to other places in the United States. Russia, they have demonstration, and in some places in Europe they have, and some places in Africa they have. So I think this is going to continue for a while.
Greece, I mean, 48-hour strike, general strike, and Portugal, and other places as well. So the revolution is not only continuing, but it's expanding.
It has to expand, really.
Yeah, I mean, this is
and it's basically is economy.
Yeah, fascinating. Since we were talking about Tahrir Square, and before we go to the last segment from Faride on Israel itself, I would like to show some photos from Tahrir Square I took when I was there on the 27th of July last year, But in those pictures, we see mostly like the families of the martyrs, the homeless, and some youth also involved in those sittings in Tahrir Square in July. So here is the first picture I have it on. So we can't see the writing. One says, I'm going to say it in Arabic, you translate. ينجيب حقهم ينموت زيهم.
Either we get their right or we die like they did.
All right, great. So this is the other one. It's just like it was fun being there, because people were like talking and demonstrating and having marches within Tahrir Square. Not too many of them, like several hundred maybe, and so forth. But there were a lot more people there. جبهة ثوار التحرير, the slogan says, جبهة ثوار التحرير.
The front of the revolutionary in Tahrir Square.
Yes. Okay, so that's what it says. And there are a lot, by the way, of vendors there. Because they figured out, hey, there's a lot of people, it's a captive audience, so to speak. Captive market right there.
Exactly.
So that's what happens.
I was there the week Mubarak resigned. And I was fascinated. There was, in Tahrir Square, there was more than 1 million persons. And the youth really were remarkable. They were adjusting traffic within this extremely crowded area. So this line will go this way, the other line will go that way. And in the morning, I woke up and the Tahrir Square was a mess. It was very dirty, very filthy. And this is a central part in Cairo, so lots of traffic goes through. So I went to have breakfast and I came back and I found young people, I'm talking about young people, college graduates, cleaned it all and started to paint in it. And this happened again and again and again. These are the people who really started this. The young people who started this are young, educated people, and they use the modern technology of communication to really reach the masses. The number of people who demonstrated in Egypt during that week was between 15 and 30 millions.
Yeah, that's right. This slogan says, on the thing, this big banner, الشعب يريد الإفراج عن المعتقلين ضباط الجيش الشرفاء والمدنيين.
They want to release political prisoners, including those who were arrested from Tahrir Square, including some of the officers, because some of the army officers, junior ones, were objecting to what the higher officers were doing, which is the higher officers were really Mubarak handpicked, and they're still playing a very important role in Egypt. They're really controlling Egypt today. So some of those young officers just took their military uniform and joined the Tahrir Square people, and of course they were arrested and sent to jail. So this, the people want them out, want them free.
Yeah. Well, okay, this is actually another one. This is far away from Tahrir Square, but this is the citadel of Saladin. The Saladin who defeated the Crusaders, by the way.
Right, yes.
So it's a very important place to visit in Egypt, in Cairo.
But you know what most people don't know is Saladin was Kurds.
Yeah, he was Kurd.
And there was no problem between Kurds, Sunni, and Shia. Now, with all these things that comes from the West, they are dividing the area.
Yeah, and just for just to say a bit of history, Fatimiyin, the Fatimids who came from North Africa and into Cairo and established Cairo,
right? Modern Cairo.
Yeah, modern Cairo. They established because the capital of Egypt at that time was Al-Fustat, and then Cairo, Qahirat al-Mu'izz. They were Shiites.
They were Shia.
Yeah.
They were kind of Shia.
Yeah.
They're a little bit different. They're Ismailite, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
But so this is rather interesting. So I would like to go now to Faride. Her last segment from the interview, and then we can broaden the discussion thereafter.
Obviously, within Israel itself, there is a huge debate on this issue. That is to say, you have, the current defense minister essentially saying that the potential for Iranian response is quite limited, and therefore saying that maximum something like 500 people in Israel will die. And then on the other hand, you have the defense establishment as well as the intelligence community, the Mossad and so on, former heads of Mossad, talking about attacking Iran as an insanity.
Yeah, I mean, here, like in terms of the relationship between the United States and Israel, on the one hand, and then the debate within Israel about should we or shouldn't we? 500 people tops would die from Israel. So one, Barak would say, Ehud Barak was the defense minister. But then others say, no, it would be disastrous. Of course, Iran in such a case would be destroyed, but it's gonna take with it, a lot of other states in the region. Right?
Especially Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia would go first. Qatar, Israel, the whole thing would be just like an insane scenario right there, which we hope that it won't happen.
Well, Saudi Arabia really is playing a very important role in what happened in Iran and what happened in Egypt. They have lots of money, and they are highly corrupted, and the distribution of wealth there is really very poor. You have extremely very rich people, and you have some people who are not really that rich. And it just happened that this area, the poor, are the Shia, where the oil is. So, and if you really look at what they are doing in Egypt, they supported the Salafis. The Salafis is a
The
very
Saudis supported the Salafis.
is a very radical right-wing sect of Islam. There are 4 sects of Islam. The one that Saud is prescribed to is Hanbali, which is the most radical one. And they have, just to give you an idea about what those people think, the Mufti, which is a post, high important post in Saudi Arabia, 20, 30 years ago, has said that we don't accept the fact that the world is a round thing, the world is flat. So this is one aspect of what these guys think, and they supported those Salafis in Egypt. They, one weekend, they were in Egypt, these people who were supported by Saudi Arabia, raising the Saudis flag, which disgusted the Egyptian, because Egyptians don't really like the wealth of the Saudis and what they do with their wealth. And also the Islamic sect of Egypt is Hanafi, which is the most tolerant one. So just to give you an idea, Egyptian Muslims, as well as Christians, really respect the saints very much, to the point that there is a saint in Tanta, which is in Central Delta. During the season of this saint, more Egyptian Muslims visited his shrine than the entire population of the Muslim world who go to Mecca for pilgrimage.
Pilgrimage.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
so
it's,
this is
it's not going to be, this is not going to have roots in Egypt.
Yeah.
But we have to pay the price for it.
Yeah, but they got what, 25% of the vote?
About
Oh, yeah.
25%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that big, and that was not like democracy. I mean, elections without cheating, because they didn't cheat at the ballot box. They cheated before that by paying money, lots of money over time.
And also remember that the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafis, with all the resources they have, they were organized. While the other parties, which is the educated and the elites and the young people, didn't have chance to really form their own parties.
Right.
And the ideal situation was that they should have a constitution first, and they should have more time for political parties to really develop and evolve with themselves and advertise, but they really didn't.
Yeah.
This is what the military really wanted.
Yeah. And so we don't know to what extent the military and the Islamists are playing, together, and sometimes they are divorced from each other, and sometimes they get back to
it's
each
hard
other.
to tell.
Yeah, it's hard to say, but it's very interesting to stay observing this kind of relationship.
Yes, but my feeling is that they will probably do what the military wants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is very interesting, because the military is really answerable to, one, the old regime, and two, to the U.S. I mean, they take, what, $1.2 billion every year from the
more than $2
United
billion.
States.
Yeah.
From the United States. Anyway, so I have also interviewed Hala Ghanem. She's Egyptian, and she was there about 10, 12 days ago. And we will go to this interview. I have a segment of the interview, and we will then discuss that.
I think the relation didn't actually start like right after the revolution, but it started actually in 2005 when the Ikhwan, I would say this, like officially started in 2005 when the Ikhwan won like 72 seats in the parliament. They became like an actual power joining the political life. So they were actually the common power. And for the US, to politically wise, to preserve the rights and benefits in Egypt, they would go and start to establish relations with the coming power. and because also the popularity of the Ikhwan in the Egyptian like street level. I mean, people in Egypt are supporting the Ikhwan because of their religious background and because of like being the major opposing, I would say, party back then. It was not a party, it was like a group of people, but being the major and the biggest opposing group in Egypt back then, they were actually gaining the support and the sympathy of the street, the people, the civilians. When you talk about the old National Democratic Party, the number of members in the National Democratic Party were 3 million people, while the Ikhwan were like, what, over 5 million people? So they were power. They had the power of the street, of the people. For the U.S. to preserve their benefits or to preserve good relations with Egypt, they had to go and start a dialogue between them and the Ikhwan. On the other hand, the Salafists are not into the U.S. as much as the Ikhwan are willing actually to establish relationships with the U.S. and have good, good work, like good cooperation with them, like cooperate with the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, along the same lines, I mean, in terms of the relationship between the Ikhwan and the United States, in terms of dialogue, etc., between the Ikhwan and the military council as well, but also in terms of how these guys were well organized, not only from 1928, but, over time, they were, because there was a lot of money given to them by outside powers like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, etc., they were able to do social services, etc., inside of Egypt when the regime itself, Mubarak regime, had failed to do so. So if that's the case, then I would vote for you, because my son was sick and, you treated him for free.
Of course.
And Mubarak, he didn't do anything.
Yeah. I just want to go back to what Hala said. 75 election, the results was that the American tried to pressure the Mubarak regime to open the system. So the philosophy of the Mubarak regime was, okay, the choice is either we, the moderate, or those radical Muslims. And they control the 17%. It is a joke that even though the Muslim Brotherhood had the sympathy of the people in 1975 and before that, in the election after that, 4 or 5 years after that, they didn't want a single seat. And this was because they didn't want any opposition to getting Gamal Mubarak to inherit his father's seat.
You mean 2005 you're talking about? Or?
No, the 2009.
2009. Yeah.
So they didn't win any single seat, which is quite obvious to anyone in the world that they really are fudging the
absolutely.
The election.
Because Mubarak always won by like 89% of the vote.
If there was really an open system in 1975,
75?
in 2005,
yeah.
And 1975 as well.
Yeah, that was Sadat.
Right. I don't think the Muslim Brotherhood would have got the high percentage that they got now.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's why I say it's important to continue observing the relationship between the Muslim Brothers and the US, and then the Muslim Brothers and the military, and also the Muslim Brothers and the Tahrir people. I mean, we can give all kinds of examples on that.
Right.
When the Israeli embassy incident happened, the Muslim Brothers did not. Did not interfere at all. They were not there. So it is very interesting, saying what, like if you elect us and we have the government.
The history of the Muslim Brotherhood, if someone would like to extrapolate, they will tell the government anything they ask from them or expected from them. But what they're going to do, it could be another story.
Yeah, That's the other thing.
And it happened
Yeah.
even in the last year. They said things, and I sat in a meetings where some high-ranking Muslim Brotherhood were there. And they told them, you said that and you changed your mind. So there is a problem with the Muslim Brotherhood. I hope now they got the majority. I hope they will do well for themselves and for Egypt.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of doubtful from the way I look at it. But
Well.
anyway, again, back to the interview with Hala, a segment when she talks about the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces and how it is relating to Egypt, I mean the people and so forth. So we will watch that.
The SCAF is taking care of Egypt as well during this period where we're going to be in power. So we have to listen to every single party. But for them, the Ikhwan is also a major power. They cannot ignore them. And they actually, the Ikhwan, have influence on people in Egypt. They have their own channels. They control the mosques in some places. So they reach to the people. Last week when people were protesting in front of the parliament, who was protecting the parliament? Who were protecting the parliament? Groups from the Ikhwan, not the police. So they were trying to cooperate with the Department of Interiors and with the SCAF. There is some kind of a deal.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Again, I gave the example of the embassy.
I think she's correct. I think the military cannot ignore the Muslim Brotherhood, but they could use it. And the Muslim Brotherhood, from their history, they could do that. So it's all remain to be seen whether really they will rise to the level of the occasion and meet the demands and the expectation of the people, or they will sink.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go back to another segment with Hala. Because when she was in Cairo, she was talking to one of her friends, and the perception in terms of what does America really want from Egypt and the uprising. So we go to that, and it's rather revealing.
When I was in Cairo 3 weeks ago, or actually 2 weeks ago, a friend of mine said something that was very funny. It seemed very funny to me. He said, America gives money to activists to attack the government and to start revolutions, and gives money to the government to stop rebellions from destroying themselves, like friendly, gives money to both sides. At the same time, they give money to movements in Egypt. He meant the 6th of April movement, to attack the SCAF, and at the same time gives tear gas to the SCAF to attack the actors. And he was like, what does America want? And other friend was like, well, America wants to make sure that everything is fine for them, for America, not for Egypt. And this is what my friend said. And the instability in Egypt is, the old idea of America being, there to protect the benefits of America and not regardless of Egypt or anyone in Egypt. But at the same time, he was like, well, the instability in Egypt is something that America wants it to last, because if Islamists keeps being on power, this will mean that the American influence on people and on the political trend in Egypt will be influenced by Islamic thoughts, not American or Western thoughts.
So, any comments on that?
Yes. What stability really the American wants from Egypt? It's a joke. They want the stability of the Mubarak regime.
Yeah.
You have our Vice President Biden a year ago. He said Mubarak wasn't a dictatorship.
Yeah. No.
And he said that Egypt was a stable country. And look what happened to the Shah of Iran. Just few weeks before the guy fell apart.
Yeah.
His system fell apart. The American really have very short-range policy, and it's based on very short-term interest.
Yes.
And if I just mentioned the continuous state of tension, look at the history between Iraq and Iran. They sold weapons to both of them.
Yeah.
They encouraged both of them to have war. This to create instability between the two and in the entire area.
Yeah.
So for the American to support a left wing and the Muslim Brotherhood is not unusual.
That's true.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to another segment dealing with the peace treaty and how the SCAF and Egypt as a whole, even the Muslim brothers, wouldn't have any interest in breaking the treaty with Israel. But let's hear Hala as to what she's going to say on that.
A Salafist figure was in the Israeli TV 4 months ago, and he said, "Well, we don't have any intentions to break that peace treaty. We may do we may do a reform, change some parts of the treaty, some articles, but not really breaking the peace treaty. As long as Israel respects the peace treaty, we're not going to break the peace treaty." The Ikhwan said the same thing about it. The SCAF is not willing to enter a war. They already have a huge responsibility in Egypt. So there's no worry. Like, you don't have to worry about the peace treaty for now, but at least don't interfere in the situation in Egypt. Stay away. Egyptians will find their way. We don't want like, seriously, I was talking to an Iraqi friend, and he was talking about Iraq, and I was like, now in Iraq we have democracy and blah, 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 blah. And I said to him, well, democracy that came on the top of a tank, an American tank. In Egypt, we don't want this to happen.
So,
yes, I don't think really the military in Egypt wants to fight Israel. They are not capable of fighting Israel. And Egypt now has a lot to worry about other than fighting Israel. However, the Egyptian people are very sympathetic to the Palestinian. And this was the case since the 30s. So we're talking about almost 70, 80 years. And this is not going to go away. So the major problem for the American policy and for Israel in the Middle East is the Palestinian issue. If the Palestinian issue is not resolved, this situation of instability and danger situation could explode at any time, anywhere. No one expected that in 17 or 18 days, Mubarak will be ousted out of power.
yes, yeah. I want to go to one last segment with Hala, because she has a message to the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces.
I have a message to the SCAF. If you have something to say about invisible hands, go ahead and say it and prove it. And stop covering your failures by saying stuff like this. If you want to proceed towards democracy, just do it. For the Ikhwan, I know you have been waiting for this for a long time, but I'm sorry you have to listen to the people who elected you. If the military wants to end this peacefully, and then I know they want to end this peacefully, why don't you, if you know that the old cabinet is causing trouble, why don't you arrest them? If you know that movements in Egypt are getting paid to destroy Egypt, why don't you go and arrest them and punish them for what they're doing? Not saying this and not acting towards it, like, well, take her. What's the response? If they're doing something wrong, why don't you arrest them? And we will support you.
But the U.S. talked to the SCAF not to arrest or raid these NGOs.
Well, the SCAF is Egyptian. And what I'm saying for the SCAF is listen to the people, not to the U.S.
They listen to the U.S.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think America should stop acting like the wanted policeman in a way. Just stay away. Let people take care of their own things. They have to take care of their own issues. It's my point of view as an Egyptian. It's not what will happen, but this is what we want. You will establish better relations with people if you let them decide what they want, not by enforcing them to do what they want or what you want.
So let's hope that what the Egyptian people want will happen.
Inshallah.
I think it's a very good ending. I just want to add one thing. I belong to an organization, American organization. It's called Alliance of Egyptian American. And we are very careful not to get any money from the Americans, not a dollar.
Yeah.
And we could have got money from the Americans. And I think many Egyptian organizations have the same attitude, including some of the Muslim Brotherhood. They said, we don't want money from the Americans because money from the Americans come with a string attached to it.
Yeah.
And we know that.
Yeah. So what I'm gonna do, because sometimes when I give talks about the Middle East and Egypt, I always say I bet on the people in Tahrir.
Right.
So here a picture of people from Tahrir who were from day one in Tahrir Square. It's interesting. The guy in the middle, the younger guy, he's an ag engineer. And he was in Tahrir Square. He was describing to me what happened on the third day, on the 28th. Yeah, what was happening against the police and the security forces, etc. The lady here, she's very interesting. She has the hijab on, but she's very liberal. I mean, usually a woman with a hijab on does not shake hands. She shook hands with me, and she, in a coffee shop, ordered the hubbly bubbly, you know. And she was there from day one. And in fact, the night before, in Maine, like hundreds of thousands of people went to Tahrir Square, if not a million. They had met with the cabinet, you know, the prime minister of the cabinet, just before that Friday. So Thursday night they met with him, and he asked them what they want. Said, we want the martyrs' families to be taken care of, the homeless to be taken care of, release the political prisoners, and all these things. So these guys were there in Tahrir Square a long time. This is on just August 31st. The police and security forces trying to get rid of the people in Tahrir Square, the families of the martyrs, the homeless, and the youth who are trying to release the political prisoners. Okay, so that's it. So we have, you know, just a few more seconds. How would you like to end it by saying something that would conclude?
I think Egyptians are going to do what they wanted to do. And the Tahrir Square will continue for a long time to come. And there are lots of well-educated young people will keep watching what's happening. Whether they are Muslim Brotherhood or not, they will watch what's happening in Egypt. And I think in spite of all what we see now, I am still very optimistic.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming, and thank you for watching, and see you next month. Mahalo.
Thank you.
Yeah.